No one talks about what happens to a man when he goes untouched for too long, not just sexually, but emotionally, physically, spiritually. His body remembers, his soul aches, and slowly the silence starts to change him. There's a silence no one talks about, the silence that grows louder when there's no one beside you, no warmth in the sheets, no skin to touch, no lips to explore, just the darkness of the room and the weight of your own breath. And in that space, in that cold, still night, thoughts begin to stir. Not gentle ones, not romantic, not innocent, but thoughts soaked in hunger, in need, in craving. You see, we often speak of connection, of love, of bonding, but we rarely talk about what happens when none of that is present. When there is no touch, no body close enough to feel, no fingers running across a chest, no whispered, "I need you." And when the days stretch into weeks and weeks into months, that hunger doesn't disappear, it transforms. It becomes something darker, something heavier, something that plays behind your eyes even when they're closed. The mind becomes a playground of fantasies, unfiltered, unshaped, and untamed. Imaginations that never see the light, desires that sit under the surface, unspoken, unseen. You can feel the tension in the air, like a storm building beneath calm skin. The ache isn't just physical, it's psychological, it's emotional, and it's primal. It's not just about sex. It's about not being wanted, not being chosen, not being touched. And when touch disappears, the world shifts. What once was a simple gaze now becomes a temptation. What used to be innocent eye contact now feels loaded. Every curve, every scent, every accidental brush of the hand, it all begins to mean more than it should. And no one knows, because no one asks. Behind the calm exterior, behind the control, behind the casual smile, lies an untouched body and a mind that's beginning to spiral. Night after night, the screen glows in the darkness, not because it's entertainment, but because it's the only escape, the only outlet for what's never spoken, the only substitute for what's been absent far too long. But what happens when even that stops working? What happens when the thoughts get darker? Not just in desire, but in loneliness. When the absence of real touch becomes more painful than the presence of rejection, that's when the soul begins to ache. Because no one was made to go untouched for too long. No one. The longer a man stays single, the more layers he peels off from the mask he once wore to impress. In the beginning, he still holds on to the echo of dates, conversations, and the warmth of feminine presence. But as time stretches, that echo fades. He wakes up to stillness, falls asleep to silence, and in between, he carries the weight of unmet desires and unseen emotion. It's not just about the absence of a partner. It's about the subtle, invisible transformation that takes place when his touch has nowhere to land, and his voice has no soft ear to whisper into. Days become reflective, nights become restless, and what once felt like freedom slowly begins to blur into isolation. The hunger that grows isn't just physical. It's emotional, mental, and even spiritual. His thoughts begin to roam into deeper and sometimes darker places. He begins to reimagine closeness, craving not just the feel of skin on skin, but the surrender that comes with deep, vulnerable intimacy. Without someone to soften his rough edges, he either hardens more or begins to crumble inside. He may become more stoic in public, more sexually charged in private, and less likely to share the tender parts of himself. Loneliness doesn't always shout. Sometimes it seduces. It convinces him he doesn't need anyone. It tells him he's better off alone, that needing touch or affection is weakness. But his body knows the truth. His dreams remind him. His gaze lingers longer when he sees a smile that reminds him of the past. The ache is subtle but persistent. A single man, untouched for too long, becomes a universe of repressed energy. He might chase distractions, pour himself into work, lift heavier, run farther, scroll longer, anything to outrun the silence that meets him at night. The mind doesn't rest when the body is neglected. Instead, it creates, it fantasizes, it replays old memories, sometimes even creating new ones, with faces he barely remembers. Every glance from a woman becomes a trigger. Every scent, every curve, every whisper in his environment reminds him of what his skin misses. Even his confidence begins to shift. At first, it may grow, the illusion of independence feeding his ego. But over time, he begins to question. He wonders if he's still desirable, still seen. The mirror reflects strength, but it also reflects need. When you've gone too long without being desired, you start to forget what it felt like to be wanted. You forget how your name sounds moaned. You forget how hands feel when they're pulling you closer instead of pushing you away. That forgetfulness doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like fading. So he begins to crave not just sex, but meaning. He wants depth, even if he won't say it out loud. But the longer he remains untouched, the more he learns to suppress that yearning. Suppression becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. He learns to walk alone, to think alone, to love in theory but never in practice. And while he might project power and independence on the outside, inside he becomes a man caught between hunger and restraint. The restraint is what tears him most, because he doesn't want to appear desperate. So he hides it, behind the gym body, behind the jokes, behind the late night stories, is a man who hasn't been held in far too long. He doesn't talk about it because he's afraid it makes him weak. He won't beg for affection, so instead he burns slowly. Burned not by fire, but by the absence of warmth. He knows what he wants, but the longer he stays single, the less sure he is how to ask for it, or even if anyone would listen. The longer a man remains single, the more his desires begin to morph into something deeper, more primal, and less filtered. In the early stages of singleness, there's a sense of freedom, the ability to move without explanation, to sleep without expectation, to choose without compromise. But time, when paired with solitude, becomes a slow sculptor. It doesn't just shape his routine, it begins to shape his urges, his fantasies, and the way he sees the world. Without the soft touch of a woman to calm his storms, his internal world starts to change. He may look composed on the outside, disciplined even, but internally, he becomes more reactive, more charged. Every scent, every laugh, every flash of skin in public begins to activate a response he can't always control. His body hasn't forgotten what it feels like to be wanted, to be touched, to be claimed. But it's been a while since that happened, and now his mind replays what his body can no longer have. The hunger doesn't just rise, it simmers slowly, endlessly, and it doesn't go away. He finds himself fantasizing more vividly, not just about sex, but about presence, about having someone close enough to reach, someone who would wrap around him, not just physically, but emotionally. In private, he may explore those desires in silence, watching others fulfill what he's quietly starving for. The images he consumes become more intense, more raw, because what he's missing isn't just satisfaction, it's surrender. He doesn't just want release. He wants to be taken, seen, devoured by someone who wants him as much as he wants them. But in the world he lives in, there's little room to say that out loud. So he hides it behind strong shoulders and controlled words. He buries a craving that only grows in the dark. His eyes change. His gaze lingers longer than before, not just in lust, but in curiosity, in longing. Every woman becomes a story he might never be part of, every curve a memory waiting to be made. The longer he stays untouched, the more he begins to invent moments in his head. Moments where someone's breathing is tangled with his, where fingers slide across his skin, where a voice calls his name, not out of duty, but desire. And those moments, though imagined, begin to feel more real than anything else. They're his comfort, his escape, his addiction. When he walks into a room, he might smile, he might laugh, he might even flirt, but deep down he knows the truth, that no one has touched him in a way that matters in a long, long time. And it's not just about being wanted, it's about being chosen, being needed, being looked at like he's the only man that exists in the room. Without that gaze, he starts to question if he's still that man, still magnetic, still enough. That questioning doesn't scream, it whispers, it waits, it grows. And the longer it stays unanswered, the louder it becomes. He might turn to distractions, work, parties, gym sessions, endless scrolling, but nothing substitutes the feeling of being skin to skin with someone who actually wants to be there. When he closes his eyes at night, the world fades, but in that darkness, the cravings come alive, not just for sex, but for connection that pulls the breath out of his lungs. He wants to feel teeth on his neck, hands in his hair, nails on his back. He wants to hear a whisper that isn't his own voice echoing in an empty room. He wants to stop pretending he's fine without it. But the longer he stays alone, the more those wants evolve. They become more intense, more dangerous, more consuming. And the world may never know, because he doesn't talk about it. He lives it, quietly, desperately, every single day. The longer a man goes untouched, the more his senses become heightened to things most people overlook. A slight brush of a stranger's arm, the soft scent of perfume lingering in the air, the sound of feminine laughter drifting through a room. All of it becomes more than just background noise. It becomes stimulation. It becomes memory. It becomes fuel for a fire that has been quietly burning inside him for far too long. His body remembers things his mind tries to suppress. The feel of warmth against his chest, the pressure of a kiss, the slow glide of skin on skin. These memories do not fade. They sharpen, becoming more vivid with every night spent alone. They haunt him in the quiet moments, slipping into his thoughts while he works, sneaking up on him in the shower, crashing into his sleep like a wave of unfiltered desire. He tells himself he's fine, that he's focused, that he's in control. But deep down, he knows that something is missing, something raw, something intimate, something human. He can go days, weeks, even months without anyone touching him, but his body feels the absence like a ghost clinging to his skin. It starts to show in the way he carries himself, the way his eyes linger just a little too long, the way his jaw clenches at night when he thinks no one's watching. He scrolls through images that once brought excitement, but now only deepen the ache. They remind him of what he hasn't had, what he's been starving for. Not just release, not just lust, but connection. The kind that makes you feel seen, wanted, claimed, and he doesn't speak about it. Because men aren't supposed to need that. Men are supposed to be strong, stoic, in control. But no one sees the storm under the surface. No one sees the way he watches the world around him with a quiet hunger. He doesn't chase every woman he sees. He doesn't speak about his fantasies out loud. But inside, there's a buildup, a pressure that grows with every day that passes without intimacy. His thoughts become more graphic, his dreams more intense. He begins to crave things he never thought about before: dominance, surrender, exploration. Not out of perversion, but because his imagination is the only place he's allowed to touch. He remembers what it felt like to have fingers trace his spine, lips graze his ear, hips move in rhythm with his own. He remembers the heat, the weight, the music of breathing in the dark. And the longer he goes without it, the more he fantasizes not just about the act, but about the connection that came with it. He wants to feel nails digging into his back, someone pulling him deeper, someone needing him just as much as he needs them. He wants to be lost in another body, to be surrounded by warmth, to hear his name gasped in the quiet. But instead, he gets silence. He turns up the volume in his life to drown it out. More work, more noise, more screens. But nothing replaces touch. Nothing replaces the primal intimacy of skin against skin, the rawness of lips pressed together in desperation, the feeling of being consumed. And the more time that passes, the more he begins to believe it might never happen again. He stops hoping, he stops reaching, he hardens. Not because he wants to, but because he doesn't know what else to do with all the ache. And so he walks through life, well dressed and put together, with a hunger in his soul that no one can see, a craving that gnaws at him from the inside out. The longer a man stays single, the more the nights start to echo louder than the days. At first, it feels like freedom. No responsibilities, no compromises, no emotional roller coasters. But slowly that freedom starts to rot into something quieter, heavier, more consuming. It becomes the kind of silence that doesn't just sit in the room. It crawls into his bones. He becomes a man surrounded by options, but untouched by intimacy. And the difference starts to show in the way he breathes, the way he stares at nothing for a few seconds too long, the way he shifts in bed as if trying to find something that used to be there. He stops saying it out loud, but the craving doesn't leave. It just changes shape. It stops screaming and starts whispering, then haunting. The body keeps score. It remembers things like pressure, weight, sweat, heat, sound. When you haven't been touched in a while, you begin to imagine things more vividly than you used to feel them. A glance starts to feel like foreplay. A compliment from a stranger echoes longer than it should. You begin to wonder how long it's been since someone ran their fingers through your hair, since someone bit your lip, since someone wanted you with eyes full of need instead of obligation. And when that gap stretches into months, your mind starts to write its own scripts. In the privacy of a shower, or beneath the sheets, or behind the closed screen of your phone, you begin to chase what your reality no longer gives you. And even that begins to fade eventually, becoming less satisfying, more repetitive, more distant from the real thing. He might smile more in public, laugh louder, even flirt harder, but it's not the same. He knows it, because that smile doesn't come from fulfillment. It comes from performance. He knows what people expect to see: a strong, confident, unbothered man who chooses to be alone. But inside, he's not choosing anymore. Inside, he's adjusting to a hunger that's starting to feel normal. He begins to forget what it feels like to be kissed slowly, to be pulled in close by someone who doesn't want to let go. He begins to forget the sound of a woman breathing heavily in the dark, just inches from his lips. And in forgetting, he also starts to grieve. Not loudly, quietly, deeply. Like a man mourning a touch that once made him feel alive. As time passes, the desire doesn't go away, it mutates. He might start desiring things more aggressive, more intense, more urgent, not because he's broken, but because he's deprived. Starved people don't fantasize about salads. They crave things rich, heavy, intoxicating. And so does he. His mind begins to wander into fantasies he never thought he'd entertain. His skin starts to itch with the memory of warmth. His hands ache not from work, but from not being held. He sees people kissing in public and feels like a stranger to a world he used to belong to. He listens to love songs and skips them halfway through because they remind him of what he's missing. And while he keeps showing up, clean shaved, cologne on, strong posture, there's something about his eyes that's different. They don't dance with confidence anymore. They plead, softly, silently. He might even pretend not to care anymore. Say he's better off alone. But his body tells a different story. The tension in his shoulders, the weight in his stare, the long showers, the restless sleep, the constant need for background noise. He starts to fill the space that touch once occupied with distractions. More noise, more scrolling, more entertainment that makes him feel, for a few seconds, what he can't feel in real life. And the longer he walks that path, the further he drifts from himself. Not because he's lost, but because no one's reached for him in far too long. And when no one reaches, even the strongest man begins to wonder if he's meant to be touched at all. But even in all that silence, all that longing, there's still a part of him that hopes. Hopes that one day someone will see past the strength and into the ache. Someone who won't be afraid to touch what's been untouched for so long. Because no matter how far he drifts, deep down, he's still waiting. Not for perfection, not for fantasy, but for a moment that feels real, warm, and finally enough.